I am going to preface this video right away and say that the majority of it is going to be a joke. I am going to talk about something that I'm fairly certain is going to end up happening at some point in Xenoblade X Definitive Edition here, but after that, I am going to move purely into the realm of making things up because I think they are funny. You will not be seeing much serious theory, speculation, or analysis here, but I do need to bring up something that I do think is going to end up happening in X Definitive Edition, purely as setup for the joke, and also I might as well say it here because there's no real way to make it into a full video itself. I can't think of the next context I would be able to bring it up, and it is kind of necessary setup for the joke. Also, I need to spoil every Xenoblade game. Probably should have led with that one. An often repeated fact about Xenoblade X is that regardless of if or how they are eventually going to end up tying the game into the rest of the Xenoblade or wider Xeno series, there's something fishy about Nopon on Mira in a different and additional way to how they are just kind of generally sus across every universe. Namely in how they seem to be directly descended from the Nopon of Xenoblade 1, or at the very least, have a story in their folklore very similar to the story of that game. While all of Tatsu's running gags are obviously the peak of comedy in the Xeno series, the most interesting and relevant one is that he just blurts out references to Xenoblade 1 sometimes in a way that suggests that's a normal thing for his society to do. This on its own doesn't really mean anything, but then you have to remember the precedent for how the new story content is likely to be handled. Every single expansion story in the Xenoblade series so far, be it on disc like Future Connected or a proper DLC campaign like Torna and Future Redeemed, has included at least one new explorable area, and I find it very hard to believe that Xenoblade X, the exploration-based open world game, will not follow suit. The thing is, though, there's a very good chance that unlike all three of those other campaigns, which are just separate options on the main menu, you will be able to access this new story content directly from your main game save file as some sort of post-game expansion to the story, again, like X was the MMO has clearly been trying to be the entire time. Since time immemorial, MMO expansions have just kind of added new continents to the world map and either pretended that they were always there and no one talked about them, or invented some BS for how they were not reachable or detectable or known about until now, so that's not a big deal. But think about the present state of humanity. The life hold is stable, humanity's not in danger of just dying out, and there are a lot of questions that need to be answered, many of which probably can be solved without really exploring anywhere, so we'd need some sort of inciting incident on top of just the cliffhangers at the end of the original story to go to wherever this new area is. And I think I know the exact character who's going to bring us there. Tatsu's frequent Xenoblade 1 references have kind of looped back in on themselves in a really weird way after 2020. And that's because one of the gags with him is that his father appears to be store-brand Ricky. He's off on some sort of hero-pon adventure slaying wicked gods, and has left Tatsu and his younger siblings, along with their pink-furred mother, to fend for themselves for the time being. Although Coco is in a much more advantageous position than Oka ever was, because instead of being in debt, she just is also the chief of their Nopon caravan, so she's also Dunga, which means they don't really need to worry about anything, and the only thing they should really be concerned about is Tatsu's dad eventually coming back alive. One of Tatsu's actual good character traits is that he wants to be like his dad, be a hero pawn, and properly take care of his family better. That doesn't really go anywhere, but then they made Kino in Future Connected, and while he does have some older siblings, so he's not exactly in the same position as Tatsu, Kino is basically just Tatsu done better. And we also know that Ricky is competent and a good father, so there's not even that doubt that, okay, yeah, Tatsu's dad might actually just be a fraud. That being said, okay, Tatsu's dad is out somewhere on Mira, but we can never encounter him in the original Xenoblade X, which means he did not go to one of the 5 continents that we know about, which means he's somewhere outside the explorable area of the original game, which means if they add new explorable areas in Definitive Edition, we might be able to find him. Or, in something that would make even more sense, he will come back to the caravan, meet with Tatsu, and Tatsu will introduce the blades to him, and whatever he ends up talking about in the unknown lands he adventured to will set us exploring them for ourselves, where we'll find more about these new story elements and probably get a couple of Mira's questions answered. This genuinely makes a lot of sense, and I'm somewhat proud of myself for thinking about it because it's a really elegant way to do it. Like, you could just say, okay, this Blade team was out in that way, they came back, they found that kind of thing. But this does not require us to invent any new characters. All we'd need is a name and design for Tatsu's father, and we can have the existing cast go there, and not really anything will be changed or need to be added to the main game. It's one of the smoothest and least complicated ways to do this thing. You can just then seamlessly transition into either a newly written story or a story drawing together elements that were scrapped from the original X. That's all well and good. I'm glad I thought of this, but we're going to stop being serious from now on. I think there's a very, very good possibility that this will happen, but from here on out, I am just memeing. Actually, also, forget everything I said about it being nice and elegant and not needing to change anything or alter any characters or plot points from the original game, because, well, clearly, Mira is the exact Ionios from Xenoblade 3, and that's the only thing the story in X Definitive Edition is going to prove. So then, how does this change things? Well, the obvious joke, continuing on from all of the Tatsu's dad stuff, would be to make him as kind of wishy-washy and not necessarily competent as Ricky was at the beginning of his adventure. But that's kind of really expected, and also is kind of the exact joke they made already. We were introduced to this legendary Nopon hero, and it was just this kind of goofy, wacky dad who, only through character development and actions he takes after the end of Xenoblade 1, is shown to be extremely cool, extremely intelligent, and a really good father. So, if they did that, they'd just be repeating a lot of the jokes they made with Ricky from the beginning of Xenoblade 1. Which means, the obvious way to anti-joke it would be to make Tatsu's dad this super cool, super competent, amazing Omega badass hero guy. But if you think about that, how many Nopon in the series have actually lived up to that? Well, I've already made a video about one of the best possible candidates, which I think kind of has to be true. Tatsu's dad is very obviously going to be Riku, and they are going to retcon Coco, who makes food and is a competent leader who inspires people and people look up to, though not necessarily a great fighter on her own, and turn her into Manana. It was teased in Future Redeemed and confirmed in a developer interview in the art book, but Riku is also a child of Ricky, so that would make sense because then Tatsu's family dynamic isn't simply a reference to Ricky or part of the joke, but something that Riku just inherited from his more famous father. Now, okay, why am I bringing Riku in here? We already have Kino. I just talked about how Kino is a better Tatsu. Well, the thing is, we know there had to be at least some big time skip between Future Connected and Ionios, and we don't know what Kino was doing at the time. In fact, the only Ricky family members we know were active in a way that suggests they could be some sort of combatants in Ionios are Riku and Ricky himself, so we can't really be sure about that. There's also the fact that Tatsu is associated with the color green and being somewhat incompetent compared to his peers. He's 13, and compare that to Lyn in everything she does, and even within his own race, the X version of Tora, who is the best Tora in the series by the way, is also just a better version of Tatsu, being a successful merchant already. While we can't chalk all of that up to the way he was raised, and it would be character assassination of both Riku and Manana to suggest that they made him this way on purpose, we do know that Riku has experience being an older mentor figure to someone like that, while Kino does not, as the only time we see him go adventuring, he's the youngest in the party. But Riku was a mentor to all of the main Kavesi characters from Xenoblade 3, including Yorin, who is obviously the Tatsu of that group. This would go to explain why Tatsu has such a good opinion of his father, because, well, Riku would be experienced with Yorin by the time Tatsu was born, so he'd know exactly how to properly raise and treat someone like him to allow him to thrive. And let's be real, we make fun of Tatsu, but it's not like he's completely failing. He is a 13-year-old and is now a diplomat and basically an ambassador of his caravan to NLA, so he's doing pretty good for himself, all things considered. Not only does this all just make sense, it also makes some of the potential story changes people have been theorizing about a lot easier to pull off from a logistical writing perspective. And that's because Riku was present for a lot of important details that he could pass on to the cast of Xenoblade X. He's a very important character in Xenoblade 3, and is the direct descendant of a party member from Xenoblade 1, so he already has knowledge about those two games, and obviously, since Mira is the future of Ionios, he'll be able to very quickly summarize the history of Xenoblade 3, similar to how Shulk and Rex summarized the history of Xenoblade 1 and 2 for the cast of Future Redeemed. But speaking of Future Redeemed, that is an extension of Xenoblade 3, and its main cast were a lot more knowledgeable of the meta around the existence of Ionios and the history of the series as a whole. And Riku was there for a very big chunk of it, including being present for the ending and the radio scene, meaning he also knows the secrets of the world even before Xenoblade 1 and 2, and can pass that on to the cast of X as well. Then the cast of X will be able to learn about this alternate Earth history and put things together and figure out how their world is connected to this other world based off of that. We don't need to introduce any new characters. We don't need to bring any other characters from other games over. All we need to do is connect two very obvious sets of dots and make this mysterious character that we didn't see anything of in the original, and say that he happens to be the same character as this other guy that we did get to see a lot of, who ends up fitting really, really well into the round hole that was left open-ended. In all honesty, there are only a few characters that would make sense to be the first mainline Xenoblade character the cast of X meets, because it needs to be someone who is perceived as friendly by default to avoid any altercations, intelligent enough to figure out what's going on with the X characters in their world in the first place, and wise and considerate enough to be able to properly explain everything to the X cast. Now, Riku isn't the only option. Shulk could certainly do it. A could certainly do it. Tora probably could if he's gotten a bit more normal in his adult age. But Riku is also a fan favorite character. I don't even need to ask people to tell if he's more liked than Tora. Riku is probably the fan favorite Nopon in the entire series now. And like, yeah, what's Shulk the protagonist of? Just the first game in the series? Nobody played Xenoblade 1. Like, more people are familiar with Xenogears than that game because they're selling $2,000 watches, and that's how that works, obviously. And then A just gets completely blown out because people like Riku more than A, Alpha, Alvis, and Chaos Xenosaga combined. So, if you want someone iconic, you should definitely go for the guy who is well on his way to being the first male Xenoblade character to get his own scale figure. We also know two very important things about skells. The first is that Nopon's skells were considered at some point in development, and the second is that tandem skells are already known to exist in universe. As the original Ares, the one Elma and her old partner piloted prior to humanity crashing on Mira, was a tandem skell, and the prevailing theory right now is that that partner of Elma's is the Black Knight who meets up with Lao in the new story content. So, if Elma and that guy are apart from each other right now, there's nobody around right now who knows how to pilot a tandem skell and has another person who can also do that they have a lot of synergy with. But Riku's been around machines his entire life. Tatsu probably picked up at least something from him and something from being around Lin, and, well, Commerce Guild R&D will learn how to make skells for themselves after being in contact with humanity and other races like the Manon and Rothians for so long. Plus, with the combination of the Prague Ares Lao stole that has now been recovered, and the Ares 70 and 90 that were made specifically for the player character, there will be enough parts and know-how around to be able to make a Nopon version of the original tandem Ares for both Tatsu and Riku to pilot together, which will finally allow any member of their race to partake in combat in Xenoblade X's battle system. On top of that, Riku is very arguably the most important character to the entire series who's never been properly playable, only being partially controllable alongside Manana in chain attacks in Xenoblade 3, so him being here and maybe being a two-person unit alongside Tatsu on foot as well would make a lot of sense and really just draw everything together better. We only need Riku to be present for all the big story connections of the main body of the new Definitive Edition story, and then the post-credit scenes or weird teaser stuff elsewhere can be where anyone else gets involved. The only other Xenoblade character we really need to have interact with anyone from X until the big crossover happens is A, and that's more just of a, hey Elma, why do you look like me, and why do you have my original Alvis form's bangs? Even then, that can be like a 2-minute conversation or even like a heart-to-heart equivalent in whatever the big crossover game is. Maybe we can have Cosmo show up too, if we want to do Xenosaga stuff in this as well, and she can comment on how Elma's true form looks like her. But hey, all Xenosaga games with the very notable exception of Freaks are the least canon entries in the entire Xeno series, so what do I know? I'm probably talking out my ass again because I've never been correct on anything. But you'll see, this time, when you notice in X Definitive Edition that Riku is confirmed to be Tatsu's father within the first 5 minutes of the new story content, you'll know that even this broken clock can be right 0.26 times a day. Until then though, because I'm going to make 0 new videos until some prediction I've made eventually proves true, this is Luxon, signing off.